was still cautious, turning back before entering for his own count and making very sure that his wife wasn't trapped into saying anything hasty. But back at Central Office, by 3:30 this morning, there was no such caution. Buoyed up, particularly by their strong showing in Scotland, the Conservatives were beginning to scent and celebrate outright victory. Mr. Patton came back from Bath, his personal loss forgotten for the time being, subsumed in the joy of the wider victory.
All of us know that this is a great evening, a great night for the Conservative Party, for John Major.
And John Major's predecessor was on hand to add her seal of approval.
Everything we've done in the last 13 years will now be conserved and built on into the future. And the interesting thing is, I think the people weren't prepared to let that go.
As Mr. Kinnock's motorcade made its way over the Severn Bridge back towards London, the bitter reality of defeat was beginning to sink in. At party headquarters, the hopes which had been strong only hours before had now dissolved. When he arrived in London, Mr. Kinnock was putting a brave face on things, and his supporters were too. A short time later, Mr. Kinnock came out onto the steps of Walworth Road to address the waiting press.
We fought this general election of 1992 positively and with dignity. We told the truth about the economy, about the health service, about the condition of the education system, about the spread of poverty in our country. And we offered practical alternatives to failure, to injustice, and to the erosion of the people's services.
Paddy Ashdown has also returned to London. He too will face intense disappointment in his party. In the library of the National Liberal Club, they've been watching the television coverage. Some have sought solace in sleep.
So the story of the night then is a fourth term for the Tories, unprecedented this century. But how was the battle won and lost? Peter Snow has spent the night analysing the results as they've come in with the aid of all the latest graphics technology, and he joins us now from the BBC's election studio. Good morning to you, Peter.
Good morning, Laurie. Here's how John Major did it. In spite of the message of the polls that Labour were 1% ahead or so last night, here we have the Tories 7% ahead in the national share of the vote. Labour still not recovering from the way that they lost all their share of the vote in the early 80s. They're still not back to the kind of levels they had in 1974 and so on when they were doing so well. 18% the Liberal Democrats, a very disappointing result for them. They're down 5% on where the Alliance were last time and the others on 3%. Now look at the swing, the national swing, a mere 2% to Labour. They needed 8% for an overall majority, 4% to deprive Mr Major of his overall majority. In Scotland there's even a swing to the Conservatives. Just look at the regional pattern of swings. Again, these swings all bringing Labour, a handful of gains, 10, 11 gains in each region. The Midlands they did best, about 12 gains there. In London only a 3% swing. You have to keep understanding that what Labour needed was an 8% swing in each region for an overall majority. And one look now again at the national share, just before I take you across to the big screen here. There it is, 7%, a 7% lead then for the Conservatives. Now let me just open the doors of the House of Commons over here and show you the way the new House will be shaped. There's the Speaker's chair. Here on the opposition benches we have the Labour Party, Neil Kinnock's Labour Party with 272 MPs. Beside him, Paddy Ashdown's Liberal Democrats, 21. They had 22 in the old House, so they're one down on where they were. A disappointing night for them. The others, the Unionists, Nationalists, Northern Ireland, Wales and so on, 24. A total on the opposition benches of 317. Now here's the 326 that any party needs for an overall majority, and Mr Major's Conservative MPs through the winning post with 334, a Conservative majority of 17.
Peter, do you feel any sense of embarrassment that the polls got it wrong essentially and that we are looking at a very surprising victory?
Me embarrassed about the polls?
Well, all the gizmos, the technology and so on, did it let us down?
Certainly not. The gizmos and technology, as you call them, are there to tell the story of what's happening tonight. What has happened is that the polls were getting a very different picture from people than the real truth. What was happening was that people were telling the pollsters they were going to do one thing, and they went and did something quite different. Now, how we're going to explain that over the next few weeks and months, I don't know, but it's a very, very interesting story. It hasn't happened since 1970. Up to now, the polls on the whole have been able to predict pretty accurately the result of a general election. Whether some extraordinary last-minute swing happened on polling day, or whether people simply told the pollsters one thing and went and did something else in the polling stations, isn't yet clear.
Peter, thank you very much indeed.
A recount is going on in the West Belfast seat held by Gerry Adams of Sinn Féin, the strong challenge being mounted in West Belfast to Gerry Adams from the SDLP's Dr. Joe Hendren. Let's have a look now at this morning's election headlines at 6:18. After 617 results, the Conservatives have 321 seats, Labour 269 and the Lib Dems 16. John Major has said that it's a victory that many had thought was beyond his party's grasp. Neil Kinnock said he felt a strong sense of disappointment, but he would stay as party leader. And Paddy Ashdown has said that he was very proud of the campaign the Lib Dems had fought.
Well, all three party leaders are now back in London from their constituencies. First, the Conservatives, and what's been a huge personal triumph for John Major. He said all along that he'd win, and with an overall majority.
For John Major, election night has proved to be the pinnacle of a remarkable career, starting with a personal triumph in his Huntingdon constituency and ending with a national victory for his party. But this fourth-term win was to be no walkover. Several tense hours passed before the pattern of the night emerged. At Conservative Central Office, party spokesmen were calm, even cautious to begin with. We're taking it seat by seat, they said. Only halfway through the night did the smiles break through. The celebrations began as celebrity supporters and cabinet members arrived for the victory party.
A majority is a majority. Churchill said a majority of one is good enough, and we're going to do better than that.
The last word lay, of course, with Mr. Major himself, who remembered Tory colleagues who had fallen in the field of electoral battle.
That the best way to say thank you to them is to carry on in government and carry out the policies we've set out for the people of this country. And that, I promise you, is what we're going to do.
At the last general election in 1987, John Major was a little-known government junior, a minister for social security. This morning, the successor to Margaret Thatcher is Prime Minister in his own right and leader of a historic fourth-term Tory government.
Even as the polls closed and the broadcasters took over, Neil Kinnock knew that the early indications suggested his campaign confidence had been misplaced. By the time he arrived at the count in his South Wales constituency, 3 hours later, his Downing Street dream was fading fast. Outwardly, though, he retained the optimism he had shown throughout 8,000 campaigning miles in pursuit of that dream.
Kinnock, Neil, Gordon.
There was no doubt about his own majority. In fact, it turned out to be his biggest. And in spite of the evidence coming in from around the country, he insisted that the night was still young. But the strain of the past 3 weeks showed as he paid tribute to the woman he called his incomparable Glenys.
In this campaign, and I think this is the place to say it, she has been the target of such spite that it disgraces those who offer it. And she bears it with dignity that makes me proud of her as well as love her very dearly.
He left declaring that the fight was still on, but in his heart of hearts he must have been resigned to the fact that it was all over bar the shouting. 2 hours later, after thanking workers at the party's London headquarters, he conceded defeat in a speech of high emotion.
I naturally feel a strong sense of disappointment. Not for myself, for I am fortunate, very fortunate in my personal life. But I feel dismay, sorrow for so many people in our country who do not share this personal good fortune. They deserve better than they got on the 9th of April 1992.
He said the party had fought positively and with dignity. It was essential that it retain the vitality and unity it had achieved. The question now is whether it will retain the man who's taken it to 2 election defeats as its leader.
Looks like a very, very exciting night.
Leaving home in Somerset to go to his count, Paddy Ashdown made a prediction at last, but his night didn't turn out as exciting as he had hoped. During his count in Yeovil, he was still rallying the troops and keeping a close eye on proceedings. But the tension showed even as his result was announced. Although he increased his majority by 3,000, his reaction was subdued.
But I believe tonight you will see that Britain will have returned strongly to the three-party politics again. Second is I think you will begin to see during the period of the night the cracks opening at last in the mould that has held British politics in sterile opposition between 2 major parties for so long.
9,000.
It was a night of few surprises for the Liberal Democrats. They did well as expected in the southwest, winning Devon North and Cornwall North from the Conservatives and gained important target seats like Cheltenham and Bath. But they lost earlier by-election gains and the extra seats they'd predicted failed to materialise. By around 2 a.m. it was becoming clear the Conservatives would win a majority, and Paddy Ashdown's hoped-for influential position as power broker in a hung parliament was slipping away. He kept a tight rein on his feelings, but his wife's Jane's face said much more. Arriving at party headquarters in London towards dawn, Paddy Ashdown could greet the day with some satisfaction. The Liberal Democrats had held their ground well. They've now got a new base of support in the southwest, and Paddy Ashdown personally, widely praised for his role in the campaign, returns to Parliament with a significantly higher political profile.
Well, in Scotland, there'd been warnings that the Conservatives faced electoral disaster, but in the event, they more than held their ground. And there was a considerable upset for the SNP. Their deputy leader, Jim Sillars, lost his seat at Govan. From Glasgow now, Mike Smart reports.
The Conservatives confounded the pundits who predicted the party would be all but wiped out north of the border. Scottish Secretary Ian Lang retained his seat in Galloway against many expectations.
Scotland has said no to nationalism. Britain has said no to socialism. And that's a double whammy.
Arch-Thatcherite Michael Forsyth was tipped to lose but held on in Stirling, as did Sir Nicholas Fairbairn in Perth and Kinross. Nationalist frustration peaked in Glasgow Govan, where the SNP's colourful deputy leader Jim Sillars was beaten. And despite the party's overall vote increasing, their prediction of 37 successful candidates is likely to fall short by about 32. Early on last night, the party was blaming Labour for false promises.
And we've found it very difficult to cope with the Labour Party argument that Neil Kinnock had the keys of number 10 Downing Street in his hands. If that turns out to be a false prospectus, and if Labour lose this election, then I think the Labour leadership in Scotland are going to have some immediate explaining to do.
Labour, as expected, swept the board in large areas of Scotland, ending up with just 1 fewer than the 50 seats they won last time. But the party's failure to get the keys to number 10 has already led to speculation of defections in Scotland to the Nationalists, or even a breakaway party seeking devolution. Even though they added only 2 to their total of 9 seats, it was the Conservatives' night. And Scotland now waits to see if the new government will remain uncompromising on the question of devolution.
So, where do the overall results leave the parties? Our political correspondent Martin Dowell examines the results and its consequences.
For John Major, this morning's result was a personal triumph, one in the teeth of criticism of the style of the Tory campaign. Despite the recession, he succeeded in holding the Tory vote at 43%, the same level as in 1987. Party strategists believe the tide turned in the last week of the campaign, when the opinion polls pointed towards a Labour government and sent floating voters flocking back to the Tories. Ministers believed they preferred Conservative policies of low taxation to fears that interest rates and inflation might rise under a Kinnock government.
The debate